Welcome to the Charlie Spice Show. I'm your host, Charlie Spice. This show has been off the air for some time now, and it was my intention to relaunch in December. However, in the wake of the recent shooting death of a sex worker in Barbados by the name of Caroline Bird from Guyana, there's been a lot of publicity surrounding this incident, and I felt that this was the perfect time to relaunch the show and to continue the narrative surrounding this incident. With me in the studio is Anesta Henry, who is a reporter from Barbados Today newspaper. Steve Ruiz from Miami, who is a very concerned, although he's a citizen of Miami, he has a great interest in Barbados and has expressed an interest in posing a number of questions to me and the panel related to this situation. We also have someone who is from Trinidad and Tobago, but prefers to remain nameless at this point in time. But she too has a keen interest. She's currently in Barbados, and having seen the article and all of the publicity surrounding the article, she has decided to come on the show to pose questions that she has for me about protecting sex workers in Barbados. So without any further ado, let us get started. Anesta, thank you very much for joining us. I'm sure you have quite a long list of questions for me, and I hope I can do you justice. Thank you very much.
Okay, good night to the viewers. So my first question would be, what would I know you've been calling for basically the sex trade in Barbados to be made, basically a framework to be developed. What would be the economic and social benefits of bringing sex workers into the mainstream employment category? What would you say would be these benefits?
Okay, the by not having a framework and by not decriminalizing, you're driving the industry underground. And there is where we have the problems with criminality, the health issues, and other social issues as well. The framework that I'm suggesting, of course, I do not have all of the strategy surrounding that, but I think it is time to have that discussion. We need to create some type of committee or some type of commission to create that framework, and I'm happy to be part of that coalition. The benefits socially and certainly the economic benefits by creating a framework and bringing it from underground, the authorities are in a much better position to address the problems. Certainly, the criminality aspect, which is rampant at the moment. We've had, I think, two murders of sex workers in recent times, a stabbing in one incident, and of course there are untold numbers of of abuse and physical, sexual, which are unreported. I have been I've been told by sex workers personally of incidents that they were involved in, but they've also said to me that they've not reported it to the police because they don't feel as though their rights are going to be protected. But we are by bringing it from underground, by creating a framework, we are going to be able to address the issue of health. For example, I see a situation where sex workers need to have a certificate of health and they have to get checked on a regular basis. So if the authorities should stop them and they do not have that updated certificate, then of course that could be grounds for arrest. So there's a measure of control there. In terms of the contribution to the economy, when it becomes regulated or there's a management structure in place, the word regulated is not a word that they like to hear. But once there's some structure in place, it means then that the government can generate revenue from this activity. I did an article about a number of years ago, I think maybe 10 years ago, and I presented it to the government showing that the sex trade in Barbados is generated in excess of $100 million a year, and I justified my guesstimate. Okay, and the government is the only entity that is not generating any revenue from the sex trade. Bars are making money, hotels are making money, taxis are making money. Uh, there's a plethora of entities that are or stakeholders that are making money except the government. So in terms of the contribution to the gross domestic product, certainly there's that potential to generate money by the government.
Okay. So there are some fragments of society that believe that decriminalizing prostitution would lead to moral decay on the island. Do you agree with such a concern?
It is not decriminalized now, and that concern exists. I mean, but in spite of morality and in spite of legality, the sex industry has grown exponentially over the years. And it continues to do so, particularly in the wake of COVID and now the war in Ukraine, where the price of oil has gone up and the cost of living has gone up in, on the whole. It is driving more people to enter into the sex industry. So it's, you know, yes, there will always be that concern, but that concern about morality has not impacted the growth of the sex trade, and it has not certainly impacted the criminal and the health issues normally associated with this level, with this type of activity.
Do you believe that government would have some challenge from the church if there's an attempt to decriminalize sex work?
Absolutely, yes, there will be some pushback, but we now have to look at the reality. In spite of religious principles and in spite of morality, it has grown and it continues to grow, and there is no possibility of stopping the industry. So we have to look at managing it. So I think that with proper dialogue, the church will have to agree that something has to be done to put measures in place to manage. And by the way, I would like to invite other members of the panel. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to weigh in at any point in time. So you don't have to be a bystander at this point. Feel free. But yes, the church will push back, but I think the church will have to listen to common sense. And if you want to address these issues, you're going to have to look at putting management in place.
Mm. Are you satisfied though that police authorities give serious attention to crimes committed against sex workers? Considering that there have been reports such as robbery and assault, some of these reports have you had, as you have mentioned, have not even been reported officially.
The feeling among sex workers in Barbados and across the world is that police do not address their their legal fears and concerns as they do people from the mainstream of society. And it is my feeling that this is also the case. This doesn't say that every single police officer will not do their best to police or to perhaps investigate an incident. I mean, the recent murder of a Jamaican sex worker, they actually found the assailant in a very quick time frame. So they will do it, but the feeling is that they do not give sex workers, sorry, the same attention when it comes to investigation as they do others. And also people who are from the criminal element, they too feel that police do not give as much attention to crimes committed against sex workers, and this empowers them more to commit crimes against sex workers. So to decriminalize it would remove those 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 contributors, to crime against sex workers,
Why don't sex workers believe though that the police basically don't have their backs somewhat?
because they're operating. Prostitution is illegal, and anytime you're operating in the black market, you will always feel that the authorities will not give you the time of day you should have when it comes to crimes committed against you. And this has been the cry of sex workers to me over the years. As you probably know, I have been very much involved in advocating and lobbying on behalf of sex workers around the world, not just Barbados. And and this is the general consensus of feeling about authorities looking into matters against crimes committed against sex workers.
Mm, okay. I don't know if any of my members have on the panel have anything to add.
Well, I do. Good evening, everybody. Steve Ruiz from Miami, Florida. Um, I had a pretty interesting list of questions that I was going to ask, and fortunately for Charlie's thoroughness, most of them got answered. But I'd like to ask a question that kind of highlights the positive aspects behind, the adult industry in Barbados, right? So Charlie, aside from the financial benefit, and I know you're gonna do great here. Um, and the health benefits behind legalizing or decriminalizing, the sex trade in Barbados. I mean, what else could be expected by doing so? There has to be a long list of benefits, right?
Absolutely. We have not even touched on the benefits to the tourism sector of the economy. If it were to be regulated and decriminalized, not only would we see a decrease in criminality and certainly the health issues connected, but we we will see we will see there's no there's no doubt or misconception that people travel because of sexual activity in the country. I mean, we can't get away from it. Eh, and of course, knowing that the sex trade is regulated and it's safer in Barbados, those who travel because of the desire or the interest in sexual activity, commercial and otherwise, um, you would see an increase as a result of that movement. So, and then of course, more money will be spent within the sector. So there's going to be a bigger contribution to the gross domestic product. Certainly, the concerns of the church leaders in terms of in terms of sex workers wanting to leave the trade and maybe not only go into different lines of work but also go back to the church, they would feel more empowered to do so. They will feel that they're not going to be ostracized should they decide to find other work or go back to the church. Right now, there are a lot of people who would love to go to church as sex workers, but they feel as though fingers will be pointed at them, and they don't. So there's an endless list of benefits um, to decriminalizing the sex trade.
And would you agree that it would also bring a lot of investment into the country because of that uptick in possible, or the possible surge of people do tourism in the country? I mean, it can really
Um,
do a big,
I want to clarify something I just said, by the way. This is not going to encourage people to come to Barbados. I mean, people are already coming to Barbados to get involved in sexual activity. I mean, that is no. Let's not bury our heads in the sand about this. People travel all over the world. As a matter of fact, if you were to tell certain tourists that there's no sexual activity in Barbados, they probably wouldn't come at all. So they're already coming. Um, in terms of investment, there are other parts or areas of the sex trade that we don't talk about, and certainly were not mentioned in the article and the comments. And that is, there is strip clubs, there sex toys, there there are there are people in um, offering telephone sex services, people on OnlyFans. When it becomes decriminalized and regulated to some extent, there will be an influx of investment into Barbados because investors will be confident to invest millions or hundreds of millions of dollars into Barbados to set up organizations that are now regulated under a decriminalized activity in Barbados. So yes, they will be concerned with investment, and with investment comes increase on jobs, in jobs, and of course, you know, it, it it helps to boost the economy overall. We
Yes.
have another person waiting to join us, and that is Jarrett. And Jarrett, I'm going to invite you in very shortly. I know you have some questions for me, but let us continue. Anesta, do you have any other questions? Or
Yes,
go ahead.
yes. You would have indicated that you have over 20 years experience basically in the adult entertainment industry. You said you're willing to assist government with developing this framework for the sex trade. How exactly would you approach this? How exactly do you plan to do this?
Well, like I said before, I think that some type of committee or should be formed, and with stakeholders, and we discuss what we want to achieve from this. And at this point, I do not have the all of the answers in terms of what we'll do exactly. But given research, which has to be done, because we need to first find out how many people are in the sex industry, how many sex workers are here, where exactly are they from, what what levels what level or levels exist within the sex industry here, what different types of activities exist here. We need to know also to what kind of monies they're spending. So, and also to we having done that, then of course we look at how best to derive benefit not only for the society but for sex workers and also for the government and the economy.
Mm, okay. So it's yet to be decriminalized, but in the meantime, would you advocate for sex workers to band together to pay someone or people to provide security for them in light of what would have happened over the weekend?
Um, Certainly yes, but it has always been very difficult to get sex workers to come together because it is illegal and because they fear repercussions by the authorities. They've never managed to come together. And this has been very frustrating for me over the years because it's already hard to get the authorities to give us an audience, but it's very disheartening when my own people find it difficult to come together. But I think police should be encouraged to do more patrols in the areas where sex workers operate. Right as we speak, police would pass by Bush Hill on a nightly basis and stop and say hi to a sex worker, maybe flirt for a bit, and go on. So they're already patrolling, but it's not with a view to protecting sex workers. It's a view to it's a matter of it's a courtesy call. I'm not saying that that they are soliciting, but I've seen many times police stop and say hi, how are you doing, and move on. So I think police should be encouraged to do more patrols right now and offer more protection because we know that sex workers are being targeted. Um, I doubt very much sex workers would come together and pay someone to do that. I find that every sex worker now is carrying a knife or two, which is not, that doesn't solve the problem. That is only going to perpetuate the problem, But I don't blame them. They feel a need to protect themselves, and this is what's happening. So, but I think police should be made to patrol with a view to serving and protecting sex workers more so than they have been in the past.
Okay. Staying in the lane of protection, since there's no fixed location where sex workers conduct their business, how feasible would it be for an organization such as yours to join with them in terms of providing some form of security for them?
Um, I That is a discussion that has to take place, and I would certainly encourage it. But I I think the help that is needed must come from the government. I do not believe we're going to get sex workers to band together to do that, although they're going to be they're going to benefit from the successful outcome of that initiative. But I believe I mean, or the Honorable Minister Kirk Humphrey boldly stated that there's a need to address the protection of sex workers, and there was mention of decriminalizing. I am I am amazed by this narrative coming from a politician as opposed to coming from me. It has always come from me in the past or other people. But I think the time is here, and I wonder why this is happening now and not before. And I'm sure that's a discussion that we'll have at some point during this discussion. I would like to invite our guest from Trinidad, who's going to remain nameless at the moment, to pose any questions she may have at this point.
Hi, good night, everybody.
Good
Good night.
night.
Thanks for
Now, I'm
joining
not
us.
originally from Barbados, as he mentioned, but I currently reside here, and so I've decided to keep abreast of the latest news. Now, I read the article about protecting sex workers, and particularly read the comments under the article, and noticed that many people are attacking you instead of attempting to understand what you're trying to achieve. So, in addition to that, they're not making any suggestions to addressing the various problems faced by the sex workers, such as like being raped, beaten, and in the case last week, being robbed and shot. Now, with that being said, a couple of questions directed to you. So, just to have an idea of the situation, based on your knowledge, approximately how many sex workers operate in Barbados and what countries are they from?
I did an unofficial research about 10 years ago, and my guesstimate was about 3,000 sex workers from across the region and, also from other parts of the world, from uh, Trinidad, from Guyana, St. Lucia, Jamaica, from Eastern Europe, from the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States. And again, I do not believe any study is able to tell you exactly how many sex workers operate in Barbados, but that was my guesstimate back then.
Mhm.
I am afraid, or I am maybe afraid is not the right word. I am sure that if I were to do another study now against the backdrop of the impact of COVID and the war in Ukraine, which has resulted in so many more people coming into the sex industry because they were displaced in from their jobs, and and the cost of living has gone up so high in Barbados. I have got first-hand knowledge of a dramatic increase in the number of sex workers entering, people entering sex work. Okay, that is there another is there another part to that question, by the way?
So, sorry, was that?
Was there another part to that question?
Well, I'm actually hearing the area of Bush Hill being mentioned frequently. So, are there any other areas in Barbados that they operate?
Uh, Absolutely. We've got the south coast and the west coast of Barbados, and these two areas are are mainly these are the main tourist areas of Barbados, and there's a lot of activity on the south coast and the west coast, but it is not limited to the coast. But prostitution and other forms of sex work take place all across Barbados. I've traveled to many bars across in the countryside of Barbados, and I've seen young ladies plying their trade. And I should also mention that there's a considerable number of persons uh, from the gay community also involved in the sex trade. Now, we talk about Bushel and we talk about sex workers at the lower level, but there's so many tiers. There are ladies who are operating at a much higher level and in the middle market, and we don't hear about them because they're more underground. They operate via the internet, phone calls, and bookings. I mean, bookings transpire on a daily basis, and people never talk about that because people don't see it. We only talk about Bushel, and we tend to draw conclusions and give suggestions based solely on what's happening in Bushel, Nelson Street, and Bay Street.
Okay, and well, being from a neighboring island myself, the size of the sex industry seems to be on a general increase throughout the Caribbean. So, what, in your opinion, are the reasons in particular for this increase?
Definitely COVID. Definitely. People being displaced from their employment, uh, the rising cost of living, the, the we also talk about people being forced into this industry through trafficking. We talk about people having no choice, but there is also a very there's a cross section of individuals who get into the sex trade voluntarily, and they have no intention of leaving until they've made the amount of money they want to make, or they've acquired the assets they want to, uh, and so the ability to make a lot more money than you can in a mainstream job. There are entry level jobs in Barbados. People make about 250, 300, 350 Barbados dollars a week before taxes, before other deductions, and it takes them a week to do that. A week of hard work. Whereas in the sex industry, they can make that with one client. They make double that in one night. So the lure of comes from the amount of money that you can make, and there's no greater incentive than making lots of money. So, but so the COVID, the war in Ukraine, the cost, the high cost, the rising costs of living, the lure of making loads of money from the sex industry, the opportunity to travel, the opportunity to meet very wealthy clients and possibly have long-term relationships, possibly get married, traveling the world. These are the things that fuel the increase. Now, there are a number of comments submitted in the chat room by Jared, and I'm going to share them with the audience and with the panel right now. Jared did some research, and he's copied an article that says, or part of an article that says a study in a Thai university estimated the sex sector at around 25 billion, or 12% of the country's gross domestic product. Some 4.6 million Thai men use an estimated 700,000 prostitutes annually, a third of whom are minors and children. Now, that's another problem that we need to address, and decriminalization will certainly, to some extent, address that. Um, he also goes on to publish that Germany, in in one of our more progressive approaches worldwide, prostitution in Germany is legal, organized, and taxed. Germany also allows brothels, advertisements, and the processing of prostitution jobs through HR companies. Germany passed the Prostitutes Protection Act in 2016, which was intended to protect the legal rights of prostitutes. Part of the act re- uh, re- includes requiring a permit for all prostitutes, um, and registration certificates, etc. So, thank you very much, Jared, for that contribution. If you would like to join the discussion with any comments or questions, please indicate this in the chat room, and I will bring you into the studio. Uh, so that's an interesting piece there. Uh, Anesta, do you have any other questions for me?
Yeah, would you support a measure where hotels or guest houses in the area where the sex workers conduct their business offer their premises for sex workers to play their trade? And I know early in the conversation you would have mentioned that basically tourists, there is no secret, and we're maybe burying our heads in the sand that tourists don't come to Barbados or other countries for to benefit from the
Yes.
sex trade.
Yes. Um, I'm going to burst the bubble here, but hotels and guest houses are already being used by sex workers and their clients. Hotels and sex and Airbnb properties are one of the biggest, beneficiaries of the growing sex trade. Now, I don't think we need to go as far as to encourage them to do it because it's already happened anyway. I think that the measures put in place should be more about protecting the rights of sex workers, reducing the health risk, and reducing the criminality, and trying to generate revenue for the government so that we can offset the costs of putting these measures in place. I don't think we need to, I think it would be wrong to in any way suggest hotels should be used for that. I don't think we even need to do that. That's already being done. And when a client and a sex worker is coming into a hotel, you cannot you can't point a finger at them and say, you're a prostitute and you're a client of a prostitute. So it happens anyway. Uh, now, Jared, sorry, I'm going to invite you into the studio. So feel free to weigh in at any point in time. Good evening, Jared. How are you doing? And thank you very much for the information you posted.
Thank you very much for having me in. Can you hear me?
Absolutely, loud and
Yeah.
clear.
Well, very interesting. And the research, especially with regard to Germany and the engagement of the government involvement in the sex trade and their proactiveness in passing acts and bringing it to the financial world in a way where it's a taxed profession, like every other business that we do. And I think for a regulatory framework to come to place and for the government to sink their teeth in it, so to speak, there would have to be the lure of taxes, right? They would have to see some sort of a financial benefit. And I think engagement on a governmental level would therefore involve three particular ministries. Obviously, the Ministry of Health would be one, Ministry of Finance would be another, and whoever is in charge of security would be the third in terms of the legal aspects of things. We're in a unique position in Barbados at present in that in order to get legislation passed, if the government is willing, they're quite able because they have zero opposition. So when they table a law, once they have the consensus from the ministers, that law will pass. I mean, obviously they have to go through the lower house and the Senate before this happens. But just from the Germany article, when you hit on things like advertisements, processing of prostitution jobs, it creates a whole separate source of income, so to speak, advertising. So you then have magazines, you then have newspapers, you then have the internet, you have the generation of permits from the government side of things, the issuance of permits. There's fees collected for that. So there's a financial benefit that the government can utilize this money that they're collecting to bolster the enforcement and the protection of the various workers in the industry. Barbados, we primarily. Pardon?
Sorry about that. Sorry.
Yeah. And so I mean, if we're able to engage the government with a regulatory framework that includes the financial benefits to that said government, I believe participation would be much more forthcoming. However, this is a tough road in a country like Barbados, where the religious right have distinct passions about what they believe is righteous and what they believe is not. And as you know, if you've come to Barbados, there is a church and a rum shop, very close proximity to each other, but there's churches everywhere. I mean, you cannot drive a country mile without encountering at least one or two churches,
Yes.
and maybe three rum shops, right? And perhaps a brothel, yeah, nestled in there somewhere, you know. No, it's imperative that we look at the countries where this has been successful, because I mean, we're not going to generate $25 billion in revenue, but we definitely could generate $25 million in revenue, you know, and perhaps even a billion. You know, we're looking at a constitution, 700,000 generating 25 billion. So if you do the math on that and you say there's 5,000 and you divide 25 billion by 5,000, you're still coming up with a substantial amount of money that's being generated by the industry. Now, a lot of this money is untaxable money, but like Charlie mentioned, referenced earlier, everyone spends back into the economy, especially if the prostitutes are mothers and taking care of children. I mean, the unfortunate and actually tragic and completely abhorrent act of murdering that woman who has 4 children. She's now, those children are now positioned where they're going to be, you know, chastised for the fact, A, and stigmatized against that their mother was a prostitute. And who's going to take care of them? I mean, where do they fall into the system? I mean, they could be 4 different fathers involved in this scenario. I'm not saying that is the case in this particular instance, but there are others where that is the case. There's more than one child father, and I
Yeah.
mean, if the mother was to be murdered or die, you know, that puts those children at a very difficult junction in their lives in terms of the caregiver for them,
Yeah.
and how they will be looked at being the children of a prostitute. You know,
Jared, before you go any further, I want to invite Anesta and our other guests to pose any questions to you or
yeah,
with regards to what you said.
yeah.
Anesta, do you have any questions for Jared or myself?
I think it's very interesting. What Jared would have touched on the point that the our government at this point is in a very, let's say the weather is favorable for them to basically pass legislation to decriminalize sex work in Barbados. Do you think though, as Jared would have also mentioned, we have so many, which I would have asked you earlier, the church. We know that, you know, the government is also in a peculiar position where we are a very Christian oriented society. And we know that, it's no secret that the church may not really favor the whole legalizing of prostitution. What advice, how would you tell government to approach this situation?
Carefully.
Yes, yes, they're in a good position. Yes,
I
they're
mean,
in a
I
good
laugh about
position
it,
to
but you got to
legalize it.
understand. Yeah, these everybody, especially the Christians, and well, everyone in Barbados is part of the electorate, and the government is acutely aware of what the electorate thinks. Now, they don't want to ruffle the feathers of their potential voters. So they have to walk the thin line of showing the benefits of the legalization aspect of it. And I think, oddly enough, the tragic incident that we're faced with now that has reached, that has, garnered quite a lot of publicity, both locally and internationally, and obviously all over the media. Well, not as prominent as it could be, but it's definitely spurred the discussion that we're having now, and the discussion that's happening amongst ministers like Kirk Humphrey and the various NGO organizations that well, the one that exists that actually caters to the sex industry. Now, I understand the role of trying to move women from being involved in the sex industry and providing them with other opportunities. But COVID has more or less limited whatever other opportunities could exist for anyone really to find gainful employ in these times. And sex workers work very hard. I mean, they work harder than most people I know. I mean, if you're a woman that is with 7 or 6 customers in a day, that is a lot of work. I mean, you cannot discount that level of commitment and that level of revenue earning. Um, Again, it has to be based on a regulatory framework that shows that it is the protection of the rights of the prostitute and the ability for the prostitutes to be gainfully employed. And I am sure that if the framework was in place and the permits were issued, that the stigmatization would be lifted and the government would be able to earn the revenue that they weren't getting before. I mean, right now, all they're getting is VAT on purchases in a store. That's about it.
I want to add something to what you said, and also it addresses Anesta's question as well. By the way, our guest from TT, you can jump in at any time with any questions or comments. By the way, okay, it's all about political expedience.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. It has never been politically expedient to address this subject because the church played a vital role. Many of the constituents go to church on a regular basis, even though they go to rum shops right after or before, and or the brothels for that matter. But now that more and more people are becoming part of the sex trade, and in the wake of COVID, where so many people are displaced and finding it hard, not just sex workers, more people are turning to the sex. So the number of constituents who are part of the sex trade are that has grown exponentially as well. So I wonder if this coincides with a minister coming out and saying something like this at this juncture.
First time we've seen that.
Never have happened before.
Never. Yeah.
Never happened before. So I have to it certainly substantiates my argument that the industry is growing exponentially, and many more people, many more constituents are now becoming sex workers, and as a result, politicians have greater incentive to address this issue now. And I believe too that when you listen to common sense as opposed to strict religious teachings, the sex industry is here. It is vibrant. It is growing. These problems are increasing. I mean, we're now talking about the death of a sex worker after being shot 4 times, and so I listened. I not only listened, but I read many of the comments against the article today and yesterday, and people are making comments based on personal opinions and making suggestions based on personal opinions, normally steeped in morality or and religious beliefs and legality, but they don't really address the reality of the problems that sex workers are facing today and have always faced. And we need to stop that. We need to look at the reality and not our personal opinions. So I think there will be a challenge from the church, of course, but I think having that forum to discuss from a more constructive perspective, I think that we will see some movement in that direction.
I mean, oddly enough, right? For regulation to work in the Caribbean, we would have to have a precedent and a Commonwealth precedent, so to speak. Now, the only country in the Commonwealth that has legalized prostitution is Canada, and it's not fully legal, and it's heavily regulated, but it thrives, and it's not taxed, but the individuals in the trade can advertise themselves, but it is illegal for you to really for you to actually buy, to pay for sex. But That's the gray area that they haven't quite worked out yet, which is why the German model is really the most progressive and one that we should be looking at if we're really trying to establish a fully protected, fully regulated, and revenue earning for the government trade. Um, it's going to require a lot of hand holding, which I know you've been doing, Charles, and many times you've had to let go of the hand and walk your own path. But you're going to have to drag. Right now, you more than anyone else are going to have to drag the government along. It helps that you have a Kirk Humphreys.
I think there's a lot to be said that Minister Humphrey has come out and boldly made these statements. A lot to be said, and the timing has to be now. Yeah. I'm sure the IMF will support any framework because how much money do we owe them? We need to start. We need to start making money.
25 billion.
We can.
Yeah. You know, okay. I mean, it allows. I mean, okay, so the workers might think I'm going to be taxed, but if you're taxed under the premise that you're protected, right? Yes. And you have rights. You can advertise. You can have a brothel. You can have things. You can have the necessary mechanisms you require in order to make the trade flourish, and I wouldn't say flourish, but function in a way that is safe and lucrative. And how you deal with the moral issues, I mean, that in itself is a tough thing. I mean, how does a prostitute who is a mother explain to her children what she does for a living and keep her children who are innocent away from the dark side that envelops the trade? One of the ways she does this is by making the profession legal and having the protections in place where she can know that her children aren't going to grow up and fall prey to the same industry, which does prey on people, and they do prey on young women, and they do prey on the disadvantaged, and this is what illegality spurs and encourages, really. And once you go legal, you're able to eliminate a lot of what was in the dark and bring it into the light. And you know, I use light as a pun, but you go to Holland, for example, where you go into the red light district in Holland, which is literally lit by red lights. And each one of these individuals in a small street are sitting in windows where they're actually, you know, selling their wares, so to speak. They're all regulated. They're all tested. I mean, this is another factor of the industry that we have to address. And I'll be straight up with you. Prostitutes are probably one of the safest sex people in existence. I mean, they know that for them to continue in their trade, they cannot afford to get sick, right? So they're the ones that will have condoms in their bags. They're the ones that will be, you know, acutely aware of anything that is untoward on a man to say, well, look, you are iffy. I'm not going to deal with you.
Yeah.
Now, some of these men may force themselves on them, and I mean, this does happen. But the safety is key, protection is key, and therefore it allows you to have, I mean, for lack of a word, pride in what you do.
Yes.
In the knowledge that you.
Okay, we're running short on time. I want, I believe Anesta has other questions, and I want us all to address them. Anesta, any other questions? Your mic is on mute. Okay, there you go.
Right. No, I was saying that I believe you would have addressed basically all that I would have had to ask, all that I have in mind at this time.
Okay, well, we are coming down to the final furlong. Our guest from TT, were there any other questions in your list for us?
There was one other, but I believe you addressed it in the speech that you were making for the past 10 minutes. It was to do with like the government and your approach and whatever. So
Yes.
I believe you answered that.
there there is a tendency of government ministers around the world, Barbados included, of taking advantage of such incidents from a PR perspective, and it turns out to be lip service. I can only hope that
This
this
is
is
not
not
the
the
case.
case,
Yeah, I hope so too.
because there's a lot of political currency that can be had from the publicity around this and making such bold statements to win favor with the growing number of people in the sex trade. And I do hope that this is not the case.
Yeah.
And I rather find out sooner than later what the
Me too.
case really is.
Yeah. I mean, I have a question for the guests from Trinidad. I mean, having been to Trinidad, I've seen, well, not recently, but I can imagine that post-COVID, the influx of Latin American sex workers into Trinidad must be immense. I mean, that number is definitely not going to be able to be accounted for. I mean, we've read recently in the newspapers how various prostitution rings have been dismantled in TNT that were primarily uh, made up of South American prostitutes. And, what happens to these prostitutes once they are found? Are they then deported back to the country they come from? I mean, that's an expense the government has to look at, that where they find the money for that. Are they somehow then integrated into the Trinidad community? Are they offered some sort of an amnesty? Or is it that, the individual sex workers who are native to the island are feeling threatened by these women who are probably offering their services at far less
Well, like,
than what
definitely, that's definitely a current controversy happening in Trinidad, where these South American women come in, and they come in by the thousands. So majority of the time, the brothels and the, well, quote unquote whorehouses in the country is primarily dominated by the South Americans.
Yeah.
Even so, it went as far as that the demand is that these men who go to these houses generally demand this then, so it kind of like the locals got pushed back or pushed aside. As for the ones that dismantle the prostitution rings, a lot of it, I would like to say, or like to believe, is fronts, because nothing ever comes out of it. You
Right.
see it on the news, you see that they dismantled it, and that's the last we hear of it.
Yeah.
As for the deportation, I would like to believe that some of them are deported. Otherwise, they just fall right back into society and they continue doing it, but I guess with just another avenue then. But
Right.
we also have the problem with human trafficking as well, which is a growing problem. And so apart from the prostitution, we have the human trafficking ring, which a lot of people also put a blind eye towards. So hopefully that answers the questions
Yes,
or
it does.
concerns.
Thank you very much.
It
Yeah.
is my understanding, Jared, that
Yeah.
the government of Trinidad is giving some type of document um, to South Americans in general who make it to Trinidad, whether they come legally or illegally. Um, they're given some type of identification document and given
Okay.
some type of status that allows them to stay there.
And
And
work for a while, yeah, that's true.
yes,
Right. In the sex trade, or work in general?
I'm
Work
work in
outside of
general.
trade.
Work in
Work in
general,
general.
not the
Right.
sex trade, no.
no,
But
I don't.
also probably at the lowest wage earning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, look, we're almost at the end of this episode. It has been very informative. I want to thank you all for joining us. Anesta Henry from Barbados Today. You now have a lot more information now. You can you can write about. I hope your editor will find this newsworthy. Jarrett from Barbados. Thank you very much for your contributions. And our guest from TT, thank you very much for being a concerned citizen. I have to a current concerned resident of Barbados, and now, none of these individuals are part of the sex industry. These are concerned individuals, and they've come to express their views on what they read in the article. And I want to thank you all. And I will do a series of discussions on this because there's just too much to discuss. Jared, I hope you can join me again and be part of
Definitely.
the narrative going forward. And Anesta, if you have any questions afterwards, if you're going to do an article, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be more than happy. But for now, I want to say thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful evening. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow evening at the same time.
Well,
Have
thank
a
you
good
to
evening.
Charlie, and
You're more than welcome.
you continue on, right?
Thank
What
you.
the work you're doing is absolutely essential, and
I can't stop.
I know you can't stop. And
I,
don't stop.
I'm too invested for too many years. Eh?
I think you're closer than you have ever been at any point in your life for this to actually become the reality that you strive to achieve.
I have to agree with you, and I will I will continue putting the necessary pressure on. And at the end of the day, I want a more inclusive society. I want it to be safer. I want to address all the concerns that people have. So we're on the same side in a sense. Okay, guys, we're gonna have to go. We've come to
All
the
right.
end of the show. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. Have a wonderful evening. Take
You
care.
too.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.